There's a particular moment in athletic history when the universe decides to collide two completely separate trajectories on the same field at the same moment. Tonight in Miami, that collision is scheduled to happen. But to understand the magnitude of what's about to unfold, you have to understand the journey that led both men to this exact stadium at this exact instant, on this exact stage. Let's start with the mathematics, because numbers tell a story that emotion sometimes obscures. Argentina enters tonight's contest as defending world champions. They've accumulated 16 Copa America titles. They've been permanent residents of the global top three for longer than most professional careers last. Every player wearing that blue and white represents millions of dollars of market value, accumulated through Europe's most prestigious competitions, playing in stadiums that define the sport itself. Then you have Cape Verde, a collection of volcanic islands in the Atlantic, less populated than many single American metropolitan areas. Nobody, and I mean genuinely nobody, invested significant money into their player development because there was no infrastructure to speak of. No massive youth academies, no elite competition at the domestic level, no pipeline that produced international players. What they have is a goalkeeper who, until recently, was collecting paychecks from the second tier of Portuguese football. A goalkeeper who is 40 years old. When Messi, a figure so universally recognized that his face appears on merchandise in countries where the majority of citizens have never watched a complete football match. He's already scored 6 goals in 3 games at this tournament. 6 in 3 games. He's literally 1 goal away from joining an extremely exclusive club of players who have collected championship silverware at multiple World Cups. This is a man who doesn't just play football, he defines how modern football is understood by casual observers across planet Earth. His current opponent, a person who was literally unemployed 72 hours before boarding a plane to Miami, Cape Verde's entire roster wouldn't fill more than one premium European academy. Their most expensive player wouldn't crack the starting 11 of most Champions League franchises. 5 individual Argentine players carry more market value than their entire squad combined. The wage Messi receives annually could probably fund Cape Verde's entire national team budget for several seasons. On the spreadsheet, this isn't a competition. It's a showcase of dominance. And yet here they are anyway. To understand how Cape Verde ended up here, you have to rewind to understand their strategic pivot. The breakthrough moment came roughly a decade ago when leadership made a decision that would define everything that followed. They decided to stop trying to build a team from the domestic population alone. Instead, they reached across continents to reconnect with the diaspora. Cape Verdeans who had been born overseas, who had grown up in the Netherlands, France, Portugal, Belgium, places where football development actually exists. Kids who technically had eligibility but minimal connection to their ancestral homeland. The Federation decided that's where we build our team. They recalled athletes who had barely lived on the islands themselves but carried Cape Verdean blood. 8 players were called up simultaneously in a single recruitment wave. Most of them were complete unknowns to international observers, but they came, and something started to click. Progress was glacial at first. Then they cracked the FIFA Top 100. Then they reached continental competition, the Africa Cup of Nations, and immediately arrived at the quarterfinals. They were building something that shouldn't exist according to every traditional model of football development, and yet it was manifesting on the field match after match. 4 years ago, they were 1 match away from this exact World Cup. One result, a single game where a victory would have sent them through to the tournament for the first time ever. They played it, they drew it, 1-1. 1 goal short of their dream. Most programs collapse after that. They lose faith. They rebuild. They try again years later, usually unsuccessfully. Cape Verde came back hungrier. This qualifying cycle, they entered a group with Cameroon, a nation that had qualified for the World Cup 8 separate times, a heavyweight with experience and pedigree and history. Cape Verde dominated that group. They lost 1 match across 10 games. They finished on top. They completed what they'd failed to accomplish 4 years prior. Then came this tournament, and they decided to introduce themselves to the world in the most spectacular way possible. Their opening assignment, Spain, European champions, a team assembled from the rosters of every major Spanish club. Names you'd recognize from every Champions League broadcast. TV analysts assured viewers this would be a gentle introduction for Cape Verde before reality hit hard. 90 minutes later, the scoreline read 0-0, a blanket, a clean sheet. Spain created chances. Cape Verde defended with organization so systematic it looked almost predetermined. Vocina didn't make spectacular saves. He made routine ones. Routine ones that nonetheless added up to something nobody anticipated. Cape Verde walked out unbeaten. Overnight, he transformed from an unemployed second-division goalkeeper into a figure of international discussion. But this was only the beginning of their group. Next came Uruguay, a nation that has claimed the World Cup championship twice. Not many teams can claim that. Uruguay can. They've won it more recently than most people realize. They're a proper heavyweight of international football. They carry history and accomplishment and proven tournament experience. The prediction was the same. Spain was difficult, but Uruguay would be manageable for Cape Verde's defense, and then Cape Verde would be eliminated. 90 minutes of football happened. The scoreline was 2-2. Cape Verde didn't just defend this time. They attacked. They scored. A player named Kevin Pena, a homegrown talent from the capital, found the back of the net. It was Cape Verde's first ever goal in World Cup history. They didn't celebrate like they'd stolen something. They celebrated like they'd proven something. The distinction matters. Then the final group match arrived. Saudi Arabia, a team that entered the tournament as significant underdogs themselves. Cape Verde needed a result. Anything other than a loss would advance them to the knockout phase. Nobody outside those 10 islands genuinely believed they'd exit the tournament undefeated. That seemed impossible. That violated all established precedent. 0-0, another clean sheet, another demonstration of defensive perfection. Cape Verde walked out of their group having played 3 matches, conceded 0 goals, and not won a single game. They drew all 3. They became the first team since 1998 to progress to the knockout rounds without recording a single victory. They did it by making every opposing team earn their points, by refusing to panic, by defending with the kind of systematic precision that transforms a potential weakness into a strange strength. Now, let's discuss what that actually means when you understand the context. Defensive discipline at this level is a choice. It's not luck. It's not accident. You don't accidentally blank Spain and Uruguay and Saudi Arabia in sequence. You don't accidentally construct a defensive structure so sound that 3 different attacking units can't breach it. Vocina didn't accidentally make 8 saves that kept him out of the scoreline. That's coaching. That's preparation. That's a nation that understood exactly what they were capable of and built an entire tournament strategy around their actual strengths rather than trying to imitate more established powers. Nobody gave them a chance, and they responded by proving the doubters wrong 3 consecutive times. The psychological dimension is where this becomes really interesting. When you enter a tournament as the clear underdog in every single matchup, one of 2 things happens. Either you become psychologically destroyed by the weight of expectation, or you become liberated by it. You stop playing to win. You play to prove something. That shift in mentality is subtle but profound. Cape Verde didn't enter those 3 group matches playing scared. They played like they had nothing to lose and everything to gain. They played like they were determined to prove their presence at this tournament was legitimate, not accidental. Argentina's own manager, Lionel Scaloni, told reporters this week something that reveals how the favorites are actually viewing this matchup. He wasn't dismissive. He wasn't taking Cape Verde lightly or making jokes or using language that suggested he was preparing his team for an inevitable coronation. Instead, he said something that should probably worry Cape Verde's supporters in a different way. He said Cape Verde did not arrive by accident. That's respect. That's a world champion acknowledging that across the field stands a team that has earned their positioning through performance, not through charity. That's not typical language from a favorite facing an underdog. Here's the honest assessment, though, the part where fairness requires acknowledging reality. Cape Verde's defensive discipline will be tested tonight by an opponent of entirely different caliber than Spain or Uruguay or Saudi Arabia. Messi isn't just a player who takes difficult chances. Messi is a player who creates impossible situations from the geometry of the field itself. He occupies space differently. He moves the ball in ways that conventional positioning can't always defend. Argentina doesn't just have talented players. They have a team that's been together, that understands combinations, that has practiced together repeatedly. Cape Verde has drawn 3 games because their offense has struggled to generate consistent chances. Their whole tournament architecture rests on defensive solidity. Against a balanced attack featuring a player who has scored 6 goals in 3 games, that's an incredibly narrow margin for error. If Argentina's attacking unit performs with typical precision, the defending world champions shouldn't require much luck to advance. That's the baseline forecast. That's what the numbers suggest. But here's what makes this particular matchup genuinely fascinating. Cape Verde didn't enter this tournament playing to match bigger opponents. They entered it playing to defeat them. Their entire psychological framework is constructed around being in the inferior position and using that as an advantage rather than a disadvantage. When you have nothing and your opponents have everything, you can take risks they can't. You can defend in ways that confuse them. You can counterattack with the recklessness of a team that knows defeat was always the assumed outcome. This is Vocina's moment, and he understands it at a cellular level. 3 weeks ago, he was probably doing what unemployed athletes do, training alone, staying fit, hoping some club would take a chance on a 40-year-old goalkeeper when there are dozens of younger options available. That's a depressing reality for athletes. The calendar becomes your enemy. The years accumulate, your market value decreases. Opportunities disappear. Then Cape Verde called. Then he played against Spain. Then he played against Uruguay. Then he played against Saudi Arabia. Then he discovered that at 40 years old, under stadium lights in the World Cup, on the most important stage in international football, he could still perform at championship level. Now he gets to test himself against the greatest player the sport has produced. This is the interview with fate. This is the audition for immortality. This is the moment that will define whether Cape Verde's run becomes a charming story about underdog football or becomes the foundation for something far more significant. A genuine tournament upset that reshapes how everyone understands what's possible when belief meets preparation. The numbers say Messi should win this. The history says Argentina should advance. The talent evaluation suggests the world champions will impose their will and progress to the quarterfinals without emergency situations. The weird part is, the numbers in history and talent evaluation were all screaming the same thing during Cape Verde's group stage. They said Spain would dominate. They said Uruguay would dominate. They said Saudi Arabia would dominate. 3 separate times, the data was confidently wrong. So which version of this story actually plays out tonight? Does Vocena stand on his head one more time? Does he construct a performance so technically perfect that he somehow nullifies Messi and sends an entire island nation into delirium by knocking the world champions out? Does his personal redemption arc from unemployment to World Cup immortality actually complete itself? Or does Messi do what Messi does and remind everyone why the odds existed in the first place? Does he unlock the door that nobody else could find? Does he remind us that sometimes greatness is actually great enough to overcome everything the circumstance tries to throw at it? The answer lands in roughly 90 minutes, maybe more if extra time becomes necessary. But there's no middle ground. There's no scenario where this ends in a draw, and both teams celebrate. One trajectory continues forward into the knockout rounds with momentum intact. One trajectory ends. One nation goes home telling themselves, "We almost made it." The other goes home knowing they actually did. That's the fundamental drama sitting underneath this matchup. It's not just football, it's the collision of legitimacy itself. Whether a team that shouldn't exist can beat a team that was supposed to win everything. Whether a goalkeeper who was too old, too unknown, too unlucky to ever make this moment could somehow make it anyway. The stadium will be loud, millions will be watching, the broadcast will reach every continent. But underneath all the noise, there's only one real question. Which version of these men shows up tonight? The Messi who's been unstoppable? Or the Vocena who's learned that at 40 years old, with nothing to lose and everything to prove, he's actually still got one more chapter left to write? That answer determines whether this is an inspiring underdog story that ends in defeat or the beginning of a legend that nobody saw coming. Drop your prediction below. Be honest about it. Who's brave enough to say Cape Verde advances? But if you're genuinely invested in the tournament's most compelling narratives, the real stories that don't fit the traditional script, the matches that reveal something about football that the analysts missed, subscribe now. The knockout rounds are where the season finally shows us what actually happens when underdogs meet destiny.